Well, good morning. Happy Sunday. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. To the fathers, you got your month coming up. So it's going to be a lot of fun. But on today's special Mother's Day rotation, we're going to be talking about a lot of important issues. We got plenty of things happening all around the country when it comes to cannabis. And I think it's time for each and every one of you to spark up, sit back, and jump in today's rotation. So I'm your executive director, a host, Christopher Cano of Suncoast NORML. I'm actually broadcasting here out of the DC area, which gives me an opportunity to talk to a lot of amazing guests, folks who are movers and shakers in the realm of Congress and local state legislators. And with us today, we have a very special guest, the development director of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, JM. JM, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Now, for those folks who don't know what you do over at NORML, you are the mover, the shaker, the everything, really part of the backbone of the organization as development director, coordinating everything from our tech infrastructure to working with our chapters and our chapter leaders like myself to make sure that we have the latest on what's going on all around the country. And I just want to say we really appreciate and a big thank you for everything that you do at NORML.
Hey, my pleasure, Chris.
Yeah. Now, for folks who don't know, JM hosts Live with NORML each and every Friday at 4:00. You want to tune in on National NORML's YouTube channel and check that show where they're giving us the latest in what's going on with cannabis policy. Now, JM, outside of what you do with National NORML, you're also the executive director of the Virginia chapter of NORML. Is that correct?
It is correct. I happen to live right here in Richmond, and so I'm involved at the local level, Chris, just like you are with Suncoast.
Yeah. So, when it comes to Virginia, there's a lot that's been happening. I mean, you all have had medical cannabis now for a bit. You actually passed adult use, but for some reason, the governor that you have, which I can relate having a governor in Florida that doesn't exactly get it. They think they get it, but they don't. Have just not been open to any progress. I know adult use sales has been something that has consistently been shot down by the governor of Virginia. And then this session seemed to be just a veto-thon when it came to anything progress-wise on cannabis. And I'm sure the folks want to hear because it feels like for every step that we've taken forward in regards to policy, we're taking two steps back in certain states. Texas is trying to roll back their decriminalization ordinances. You got the Dakotas and Nebraska where they've tried to roll back legalization measures. In Florida, they're making it more difficult to put things on the ballot. And then, of course, now we have Virginia. So tell us a little bit about what's happened this session in Virginia.
Oh, well, I think you nailed it. It was just sort of veto mania this session. This is the last General Assembly for the current governor, Republican Glenn Youngkin. And then this November, Virginians have the opportunity to elect a new governor, hopefully one who has an actual understanding of cannabis policies and how they work across the country. This year, we again had an adult use retail sales measure. Virginia passed legalization in 2021. This was a virtual session that year. So some things happened that had we been in the room, arguably would have prevented from happening, but they were sort of sequestered over at the Science Museum and got away with some shenanigans in 2021, which meant putting what's called a reenactment clause on the adult use measure that meant it has to come back and be voted on again. And it wasn't for the totality of the bill. At least the legalization of possession and consumption and adult sharing and personal cultivation did take effect, but the retail sales component had that reenactment clause. And then subsequently, there was an election that November in which Glenn Youngkin won, and there was no opportunity during his term to pass successfully a retail sales measure because he has vetoed it every time it has reached his desk. That's right, Virginia, elections have consequences. Now, despite his complete opposition to citing a retail sales measure, he has, up until this year, been willing to sign the medical cannabis operations bill that we have every single year that sort of cleans up what needs to be tightened up or corrected in code. And this year, he vetoed that, which is frankly astonishing. It's one thing to say, I don't want, his claims, I don't want a pot shop on every corner. It's one thing to hang your hat on that and to be vetoing, a component of legalization, but to veto an operations bill that would have improved labeling for medical cannabis and that would have codified where delivery is permissible and where it isn't is wild. It absolutely highlights the fundamental lack of understanding that both he and his administration have when it comes to the public safety implications of cannabis policies. He also vetoed, as you and I were talking about earlier, a bill that we've had for a number of years now that would have really given judicial discretion and provided direction to Child Protective Services when it comes to medical cannabis patients and adult use consumers. Not saying you can't ever take any action, but saying, hey, as long as someone is consuming legally and is not endangering their children, then that does not need to be considered. He vetoed that as well.
The parental rights, parental protection bill, however folks want to call it, it's been something that NORML chapters across the country have advocated for in various states. The state of New York seemed to kind of get it right. So, us here in Florida definitely modeled it a little bit after what our chapters up north have done and looked at some of the other chapters out west. But not every state protects the rights of cannabis consumers as parents. We've seen people who have had to utilize cannabis to help them through very difficult pregnancies, to cope with morning sickness, and then they test positive in the hospital. And there's a lady in South Carolina who has not seen her child in almost 5 years since she's given birth. These are the reasons that we need parental protections for medical cannabis consumers. So, if a doctor says this is the best thing for you, then you should be able to utilize it. Cannabis in pregnancy is still a taboo subject for a lot of folks. But even if after the fact, even if you have a clean pregnancy, even if you don't get tested in the hospital, if you're just a parent and you're a medical cannabis consumer and you go through an ugly divorce fight, or kid says something at school, and then all of a sudden you have CPS at your house, you have Child Protective Services investigating you, and you're following the law, you're doing everything right. That makes no sense why people's civil rights should be tramped down upon just for doing the right things by the law. And that is the biggest disconnect that we still have in this country. And it doesn't just happen with parental rights. It's still happening with employment protections in the various states. People are still precluded from jobs, fired from jobs. Even in the state of Maryland, where I do a lot of work in my day job at, they're still working to try and pass, at a state level, more meaningful employment protections for people. I know a lot of firefighters had a lot of concerns about getting fired from their jobs. And so they've been some of the biggest advocates that we've been able to ally with. But it's just crazy to me to see these folks who just don't get it. And the disconnect with Governor Youngkin, I see paralleled with the disconnect with Governor DeSantis, with the disconnect with Governor Abbott in Texas. People often accuse me and folks on this show of being lefties. I know you are very diplomatic. You're very politically neutral because you're trying to get the work done. But why is it that these red states seem to just not get it? There's some red states like Utah that do, but some of these bastions of just of what we've seen carry the current conservative banner just aren't getting it. And I know Virginia is a battleground state. That's not even really a red state. So I'm having an issue with understanding what are the motivations of these folks. And so what are your thoughts?
I think that, if you sort of start peeling back the layers of the onion on each individual person, you may find nuance to what their opposition is. But I am of the opinion that in general, there are people who have come to rely on capitalizing criminalization. There are people who benefit from prohibition and the revenue streams that it creates. Now, this isn't to say that they are necessarily aware of it, but they're used to it and it works for them. And they are loath to overturn that. Whether that's because of some deep-seated personal belief that they're hanging their hat on, like Youngkin, who just, has this sort of holier than thou affect, and all drugs are bad or marijuana is terrible or whatever. Or if you are Ken Paxton in Texas, who makes a lot of money for his law enforcement on criminalizing consumers, those prohibition structures that don't automatically get overturned with legalization of adult or medical use until a group like NORML comes in and digs up those roots that run deep, does that dirty work. People are going to continue to capitalize on them and want to maintain those structures. And I think that's what we are seeing across the nation. And I know, Chris, but it is no joke when NORML says, as we have been saying very loudly this year, cannabis consumers' rights are attacked across the nation. There is an effort in multiple states to roll back your rights, your legal protections that we have all collectively fought so hard to enshrine. We're not kidding. It is serious, and these are just more stunning examples of what's happening around the country.
I'm glad you said that. A lot of folks think that progress has been made, that we can rest on our laurels, but half of this country still remains bastions of prohibition. And as you said, there's money in politics that, regardless of how much progress we made, there are structures there that pay politicians, and they're not going anywhere. For example, the Geo Group, which is one of the largest private prison operators on the planet, has a stranglehold on the Florida legislature for sure. And so when we see things in other states, like the probable cause for smell being taken away by legislative action, that's awesome. In Florida, we recently had some court actions that say, wait, because drug dogs can't tell the difference between hemp and medical marijuana or illicit marijuana, that's not necessarily probable cause. But without expensive court cases, we don't see oftentimes prohibition rolled back, and we don't see the political will from the politicians to actually think about people's consumer rights and civil rights as cannabis users, because cannabis users are not a respected voting bloc. And I think that's part of what we have to continue to do at NORML, is to build that block, to get folks educated and motivated to step out of the shadows and really, take ownership of elections. So Virginia has elections, which is, every state has different schedules. So y'all's election are actually coming up. Like, this is the summertime. This is the where it's going to really heat up for your primaries and for where folks are going to shake out in November, right?
Yeah, actually, early voting's already underway in Virginia for the June primaries. Early voting started on May 2nd here in Virginia, and there are primaries for the Democratic candidate for lieutenant governor, the Democratic candidate for attorney general, and the Republican candidate for attorney general. So, it's time to vote, Virginia. It's time to make sure you vote in primaries right now. And the good news is we can tell you where the candidates stand on cannabis policy, not only in Virginia, but in whatever state you're in. And there are primaries happening around the country. There are also a number of special elections this year, and our NORML interns have been hard at work making sure that we have all the latest information in NORML's Cannabis Voter Guide, Smoke the Vote. You can find that at vote.norml.org. Click on your state and you'll see who's on your ballot and where they stand on cannabis policy. Now, if they don't have any information, it's because they didn't answer our survey. If you know where a candidate stands and there's no information, right there in Smoke the Vote is a place where you can let us know what you know about that candidate, and we'll check it out. What we're looking for are quotes in the media, maybe a post on their social media or on their campaign website, anything like that. Or, hey, if there isn't a quote, go meet with this candidate and try and get their answer on video.
One of the things that came up recently has been the proposed a U.S. attorney for the D.C. area wanting to crack down on medical dispensaries, and that candidate has been since replaced by Donald Trump with Fox News host and former Judge Jeanine Pirro. I'm interested, to see, because Judge Pirro actually sits on the board of a CBD company. So, for all the smack talking that we get out of the talking heads on the media, sometimes it's ironic to see where their loyalties can lie. So do you think that Judge Pirro would be a better pick, considering that they know a little bit more about cannabis than this person who wanted to shut down medical dispensaries in the DC area?
I think that's something that we're going to find out together, Chris. It could go either way. It might be that this person does perchance know something, or maybe not.
Well, yeah, you're right. It still remains to be seen. We've seen people at cross purposes. I remember a few years back in New York when the General Assembly there was debating legalization, and some prohibitionist assemblyman gave this grandstanding speech about how the dangers of marijuana, how illegal it was, and then he got arrested for hotboxing his car during the break. So that's just sometimes karma just comes back into the universe and gets people where it is. So hopefully these folks who sit on cannabis boards and have companies and have vested interest in it will definitely do better when it comes to policy. So you're right. I do have hope. But sometimes hope has to give way to justice, and let's hope that we get the right folks in the right offices. So elections matter. Again, if folks want to know what's happening in Virginia, JM is leading the charge there and also helping us at National NORML as our development director. But go to Virginia NORML's website and check out the latest and what's going on there. JM, when it comes to national, you all have done a fantastic job at National NORML letting us know what's happening. But I'm really concerned about in Nebraska. It seems like they're trying to roll back what voters have actually voted on when it comes to medical cannabis. And I think that should give us all pause, because for most states, especially states in the South, especially states that aren't battleground states that tend to be more conservative, it has been the voter approved initiatives that have put it over the top. And I'm just concerned that the will of the voters can be subverted now. What are your thoughts as to what's going to happen next?
This is a tactic we are seeing, around the country. Of course, Chris, voters are deciding what they want on cannabis policy, and then we're seeing legislators take action to undo the will of the voters, Nebraska being the latest. There's so many to choose from, but Nebraska being a really timely example of that. The Attorney General in Nebraska is really sort of leading the charge to push back on the adoption of the voter-approved medical cannabis measure. And then this week, if you're a subscriber to NORML News, you would have seen that there was a measure advanced in the legislature that really guts the voter-approved medical cannabis law. I'm taking a look at some of my notes on it right here. And not only would it prohibit the smoking of medical cannabis, but it imposes a limited, made-up list of conditions of who can access medical cannabis and who instead deserves to go to jail. It decreases the amount of medical cannabis that a patient can possess from 5 ounces to no more than 2 ounces. Remember, voters approved no made-up list of conditions. They approved smoking. They approved 5 ounces, and the legislature is saying, no. I know you voted on this, but we have feelings, and our feelings say this is better. And then, also it's going to restrict what healthcare practitioners, which healthcare practitioners can, issue certifications, and under what circumstances they can issue medical cannabis certifications. So just another example of coming for consumers and coming for your rights. We're seeing this in Ohio as well, where voters approved a legalization measure, and the Ohio legislature said, no, I think we know better. We're going to do it this way instead, and we're going to gut that measure that voters approved.
It's just infuriating. We had a similar thing in Florida where, in 2016, voters passed the medical cannabis amendment. And yet when the legislature decides to do implementation language, you see things like the doctor restrictions and making doctors jump through hoops to get certified. And then you see the made up list of conditions. And then over the past 8 years, we've tried to expand that list of conditions and no bill hearings. We've tried to add employment protections, no bill hearings, parental protections, no bill hearings. Thankfully, our Second Amendment protections are going through via a court case, folks, it's just infuriating to see that they think as a cannabis consumer, if you want that right, you got to give up every other civil right that you have and just sit at home and smoke pot all day, because apparently that's the only way it functions as a system. And that makes absolutely no sense. And we in Florida, Governor DeSantis just signed legislation this week that will make it much harder to put ballot initiatives from the citizens, on the ballot. It's going to tamp down on everything from being able to have paid petitioners to, how short of a window you have to turn in petitions. I do know that the Amendment 3, which was the adult use amendment that happened in 24 last year, that has a lot of concerns because folks feel as though big cannabis had a big stake in that and put a lot of money into it. And now they're trying to put it back on the ballot for 26. And in the new one, they're trying to please people who don't want it in the first place. So now they're going to have a smoking ban. And a lot of advocates in our state are giving pause, even myself, of putting a smoking ban in the Constitution. And so this is the situation that we're in. It's like, where do we go? We want people to stop being arrested. We want to end the felony arrests for 20 grams. In these other states, they're talking about 5 ounces. And in Florida, more than 20 grams will hit you a felony charge. I know this personally. It's the reason that I moved on to founding our chapter with Carlos, because it happened to me while I was getting, cannabis for my dad to help with his dementia. And at the time, there was no medical cannabis laws. There was no recourse to help. And I mean, it's just sad to see that this is the state of affairs that we're in this country. But there's hope, right? There's always hope. There's always progress. The hope lies in us, the people, getting off our behinds and doing what we can. Whether it's becoming a member of your local chapter. For folks in Florida, join Suncoast. If you're of course in Virginia, become a member of Virginia NORML, team up with JM to make it happen, or go to norml.org and form your own chapter. Find out what it takes. JM, you're the development director at National. I know you'll guide folks along the process. You've been great in helping us at Suncoast NORML, guide through the process of starting our own chapter, get everybody certified. But one thing that I saw this week that kind of, I don't know if it's a good thing, a bad thing, was in Pennsylvania, their House lawmakers have advanced a bill for adult use, but there's no private market. It's all going to be in state-run stores. It's like, okay, so communism is communist weed. Like, what? Help me with this. I'm confused.
We're all confused, Chris, because Pennsylvania, right? Pennsylvania, what are you doing, kids? There are other states that came well before you, Pennsylvania, that also explored the legality of a state-run model. And sit down and listen closely when I tell you this, Pennsylvania. Utah explored this for their medical cannabis program, and Utah was able to understand the conclusion that this is not a legally tenable solution, that it would open the state and the employees to legal consequences if you are, as a state, requiring an employee to engage in something that is federally illegal. Utah, Pennsylvania, Utah understood this. What are you doing? Why?
I don't get it.
I
I don't get it.
So this bill was always DOA. This bill was never going to go anywhere. Let's be real. And listen, at the end of the day, if this were the only vehicle, if this were the vehicle that were going to succeed in Pennsylvania, if Pennsylvania were going to pass this measure and the governor were going to sign it, then we would say, you know what? NORML would say, this is a bad idea, but we won't oppose it, because if it ends arrests, that's our primary objective. The same thing could be said about whatever ballot measure we end up seeing in Florida. Will it be perfect? Absolutely not. No ballot measure in any state, or legalization measure, or decriminalization measure, or medical cannabis measure is ever going to be perfect, and that's okay. It's okay to say, this isn't quite right, but it's going to end arrests, and so we're going to say yes. It's okay, because then you can come back and you can do better next year. But this Pennsylvania half-baked idea was nonsense, and we provided ample direction during the formulation of this, like, hey, this isn't a good idea. There were a number of, I'm going to take a quick look and tell you how many people, Chris, contacted their lawmakers and said, oh, just say no to state-run stores. In fact, I have actually a very entertaining little story about this. Our Montco NORML chapter had a great, oh my God, that's more than I thought it was going to be. Okay, our Montco NORML chapter had a lobby day in Pennsylvania, and they had these signs on their table, and for their presser, they had a little press event, and they said, just say no to state-run dispensaries. And I had a colleague of mine call me later that day and said, I just saw a Republican senator walking through the hall of the Capitol carrying one of your signs. And so I went up to him and started talking, and he was like, yeah, I stole this. I need to put it up in my office. I thought that was I have a picture of it, of course. Very entertaining. But 1,178 constituents emailed their lawmakers in Pennsylvania and said, no state-run stores. And this doesn't mean they're opposing legalization. This means they're saying, hey, this is not the right way to do it. It opens the state to legal jeopardy.
No, it makes total sense. I mean, as long as it's still Schedule 1 federally, we're going to run into these issues. There can't be state-run stores. There can't be public employees, changing things up. That's been one of the holdups with the VA. You can't have an agency of the federal government recommending something that the federal government says is illegal, that has no medical value, which also is the absurdity of the Schedule 1 status of cannabis. And the folks in the 70s who put it there knew exactly what they were doing when they did it. Right. And it's going to take an effort in Congress to change that. Now, we came together at NORML to team up with the Last Prisoner Project and Drug Policy Alliance, Students for Sensible Drug Policy, Reason Foundation, and tons of other organizations across the country for Unity Week at the end of April. And, here we are still seeing a Congress that they can't even pass a budget, and do the one thing they're prescribed by the Constitution to do. And so, seeing Congress take any meaningful action on cannabis, it just isn't right. I mean, we have members of Congress in both parties, whether it be Brian Mast on the Republican side or Ilhan Omar on the Democratic side, that, would not agree on anything. Most days they're at war with each other, but they're co-chairs of the Cannabis Caucus, which is just kind of boom, when you think about it. I mean, in foreign policy, these are polar opposites. But when it comes to cannabis, you have a Republican congressman from Florida, you have a Democratic congresswoman from Minnesota saying, yeah, it can work. This is something we should address in a meaningful way, that people shouldn't get arrested for it, that there should be safe access for it, that people shouldn't lose civil rights over it. But for some reason, Donald Trump chose to put Jeff Sessions is his first attorney general and Pam Bondi as his second. And I'm having a lot of hard time with folks who think that we're going to see more progress out of this administration. I mean, you've been around in the D.C. area for a while. I know you're politically diplomatic on things because you got to work across the aisle and folks different ways. But what are your thoughts on this administration? Is it going anywhere, or are we just going to see another, quagmire and when it comes to progress for the next 3 years?
Okay, well, there are two parts to this. So first, let's talk about Congress, right? America, if you don't elect a Congress that supports the cannabis policies that you want to see, then you will not get those cannabis policies. In order to end federal prohibition, that means Congress has to pass a bill that does so, that removes marijuana from the Federal Controlled Substances Act altogether and allows states to set their own policies without threat of federal interference. That is how federal prohibition ends. It doesn't happen by executive order, by Donald Trump waving his pen in the air. None of that is how federal prohibition ends. It requires an act of Congress. And then it requires the president to sign such a bill. America, you have not elected a Congress that wants to pass a bill that does that. That's on you. Do better. Second, this administration, or whatever it is, this circus, okay, what are they going to do? Every day is a new delight with this administration. There goes my diplomacy out the window. But what we can look at with this administration is the rescheduling process. This is an administrative process that is underway. This is entirely different than descheduling, removing marijuana from the Controlled Substances Act, which requires what? An act of Congress. Rescheduling is the only consideration that is on the table in that administrative process that is underway. It is entirely the norm when there is a transition of administrations for any processes like that to be paused, which they were. Now, Donald Trump has the opportunity to unpause that administrative process and have it start back up, have those hearings start back up, have the continued conversations that were already underway in the previous administration regarding the moving of botanical cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. We've done a lot of deep dives on this process, myself and Paul, on Live with NORML. You can see any of those shows on NORML's YouTube, of course. But that is something this administration can and should do.
Well, JM, we appreciate you joining us in the rotation today, giving such great updates as to what's happening across the country, what needs to happen next federally. Obviously, there's a lot of power in President Donald Trump being able to address things with rescheduling in the administrative process, directions that he can give Attorney General Bondi in regards to, whether or not they decide to crack down in legal states. And then, of course, there's a lot of influence on governors across the state, who are not being the greatest on policy, and he can really bring them to the table. It was said that, he endorsed Amendment 3 in Florida, that, it was on the campaign materials. He met with the heads of some major multi-state operators, big cannabis, if you will. I mean, True Leave and Cure Leave donated a combined $1 million to his inauguration campaign. So we're seeing cannabis companies definitely have a stake in this administration and the policies they have. But it's cannabis consumers that NORML represents. It is the one lobby that the cannabis smoker, consumer, dabber, edible consumer, however your method of ingestion might be, has had since the get-go, since Prohibition in 1970 was rolled out. And we're going to continue to keep fighting, but we can't do that without individuals, without people stepping up and becoming members. So, of course, become a member of Suncoast NORML. If you're in the D.C., Virginia area, JM is holding things down at Virginia NORML and at National NORML as our development director. Check out Virginia NORML's website, become a member today. And if not, go to NORML.org normal.org, and JM will help guide you through the process of getting a chapter going in your neck of the woods, in your state, and what it's going to take. But we can't do this without people, and we need each and every one of you. And of course, don't forget to like, click that share button, and subscribe so we can continue to bring you great information and great guests each and every week here in the rotation. JM, why don't you go ahead and close us out? Is there anything that you want to say to the viewers, or any last pitch that you want to make so folks can get off the couch and get involved?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Every Thursday, we deliver NORML News of the Week, and every Saturday, we deliver NORML's Weekend Weed Read. What a great way to start your weekend. You can get both of these delivered straight to your inbox by heading to normal.org/subscribe. Make sure you check that Weekend Weed Read box so you always get that as well. And in those emails, we're going to tell you the latest and greatest on cannabis science and policy news. We're going to let you know when to take action. And our Take Action Center is so easy to use. We tell you what the bills are and provide you a link and a pre-written letter so you can send a message directly from yourself to your lawmakers, literally with just a few quick clicks, and it's done. So easy to be politically engaged on cannabis policy action with NORML. And be sure to check out Smoke the Vote, NORML's cannabis voter guide at vote.normal.org.
Well, we appreciate everything that you do. Of course, check out vote.normal.org, Smoke the Vote voter guide. If you know something about a local leader, elected official, politician is running for office, visit that and put in the info. Again, we get the information from you, the viewers, the grassroots. This is how NORML has always operated, as a grassroots organization, and we need your help to make it happen. And of course, go ahead and hit that like or subscribe button. Share these. Go online and become a member of your local chapter. And then, if you can't do any of that, you can always make the choice to just send us a few dollars. Donate your time, your treasure, your talent. All of that goes a very long way to making sure that we can continue to bring you the latest in cannabis news and policy updates each and every week. JM, we appreciate you so much for joining us. I hope you are feeling a little bit better. I can hear it in your voice. You've been from everything from talking to these politicians to probably yelling on the floor, "You're a dummy, don't adopt these policies." And so I know that you want to go ahead and rest the voice this weekend by all means. But with all of that, I think it's time for us to go ahead and jump into the news. And we wish you a great one.
Thank you.
So at the top of the news hour, we're going to keep the news short and sweet today, but I think it's very important for folks to know that there is some great policy news and, of course, research news that is always out and about, and I think it's important for folks to pay attention to what's going on with the news. And so there is an analysis that has been published according to medical imaging data in the journal Current Problems in Diagnostic Radiology. And this analysis says that cannabis smoking is not linked to an increased risk of emphysema or other tobacco-related harms. Harvard Medical School researchers compared chest CT scans of 285 subjects. 89 participants were non-smokers, 97 smoked tobacco, and 99 smoked marijuana. The participants who smoked tobacco exhibited greater damage to their heart and lungs than those who did exclusively smoke marijuana. Specifically, tobacco smokers were far more likely to demonstrate moderate to severe coronary artery calcifications and suffer from emphysema. And quote, the findings of our study collectively highlight the distinct patterns of pulmonary and cardiovascular manifestations associated with smoking and marijuana use, the study's authors concluded. It appears that in general, marijuana users do not appear to develop emphysema or pulmonary hyperinflation. Their conclusion is consistent with several other studies, finding that cannabis smoke and tobacco smoke are not equally carcinogenic, and that marijuana smoke exposure is not linked to higher risk in either COPD, emphysema, lung cancer, or other tobacco-related harms. And moreover, the use of vaporization technology, which heats herbal cannabis to a set temperature below the point of combustion, is associated with a reduced exposure to toxic gases and has been identified as a safe and effective cannabis delivery device in clinical trial settings. Look, all in all, team, it's important for folks to know that vape pens are the way to go. Make sure that they're tested, make sure that they're safe, make sure they don't have any adulterants. So get them at a licensed and tested place. And again, you have the opportunity to hear the news and read these studies at normal.org, learn the latest, go ahead and sign up, and you can hear what's going on. Now, one last study I think is important, and it dispels a lot of the myths and stereotypes we see around cannabis, is a study of data that's been published in the Journal of Cannabis Research coming out of Belgium, and it is that cannabis use is not associated with sedentary lifestyle. Belgian researchers examined the relationship between the past month cannabis use and the physical activity in a cohort of adults ranging from ages of 15 to 64. And after controlling for potential co-founders, investigators reported that the past month cannabis consumption had no effect on participant levels of physical activity. The stereotypical image of cannabis users having more sedentary lifestyles should be critically reevaluated in light of our and other research quoted by the study's authors. Their findings are consistent with those of a 2024 study that similarly determined marijuana use is not associated with lower exercise rates among adults in the United States. Their conclusions are inconsistent with those of other recent studies, finding that adults with a history of marijuana use and older adults in particular typically exercise more frequently than their non-using peers. And look, again, you can read the full text of the study. Cannabis use is not associated with altered levels of physical activity. Evidence from the repeated sectional Belgian health interview survey, and this appears in the Journal of Cannabis Research. So, of course, look, it doesn't matter whether you're having issues with, prohibitionists in your state, you're having issues with these phony scientists propagating more stoner stereotypes, you can always go to normal.org and learn more. You can get the latest information at normal.org, learn the facts, fight back, and of course, become part of the fight to legalize it. So again, I just ask everyone, for many of you, it only takes a second, but hit that like button. Go ahead and hit subscribe. It means the world to us. It makes all the difference, and continue to being able to bring you this great content. JM, thank you for everything that you do at NORML. And we hope that we'll catch everybody next week in the rotation.